Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and I have finally been able to get my hands on Paper Mario: The Origami King, because I know we had a review that went out, but there's a reason I didn't have any personal thoughts at the end. I didn't blooming play it, and I've been really enjoying myself overall. I've been enjoying it much more than I expected, to be brutally honest with you, for a number of different factors. But one of those where I haven't so much been is the combat. I wouldn't even say I out and out disliked the combat, but I think it 100% completely misses the mark over what Nintendo were aiming to do, as revealed by a recent interview where they only bloomin' chatted about what they wanted. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. So a really brief overview of the Origami King's combat system, because it is kind of crazy. So Mario is in the middle of this ring, and you've got to rotate the rings, and you slide them back and forth and stuff like that in order to try and line up enemies. The stuff that you're seeing will make way more sense than my description. Line them up so that you can take them out and hit them as much as you possibly can. Fine. That then flips on its head to a degree when it comes to the boss fights, where in fact Mario is on the outside and you do the same maneuvers to try and get Mario to a particular point on the boss, and then, have him land on a particular panel so that he attacks and stuff like that. And if that sounds more complicated, that's because it is. And I would say overall, I'm generally fine with the combat. I kind of like it in some ways. I much more prefer the boss fights than I do the normal fights, but even the normal fights, sometimes they're fine, I'm not writing home about it, but at the same time, I'm not dreading it, But the thing is that it is not what Nintendo intended for it to be. I mean, I get it, experimentation and stuff like that, and sometimes it doesn't work. But in a recent interview, Kensuke Tanabe explained all manner of things, one of the most important being the fact that Nintendo said, no, you can't modify Nintendo characters, which means you can't have a Goomba with a hat. But that also they wanted to try and make the Origami King as appealing to casual fans as it was, to hardcore fans, which I totally get, sort of the casual market is absolutely chuffing enormous, and you want to try and appeal to as broad a demographic as possible. And it's been done in some brilliant ways in the past, and yeah, that's fine, colourful, Paper Mario game, of course you want it to appeal to, let's just say it, kids. But this combat system does not do that. I mean, sort of the rest of the game, even the original Paper Mario games, they would appeal to a broad demographic, absolutely, because they're bright, colourful, and, Mario moves around as paper. It's very straightforward. The combat, you could argue that a typical turn-based RPG combat system is not necessarily the most intuitive, and, especially when you're throwing in RPG elements and stuff like that. Somebody who's never played games before, for example, may be a little bit, overwhelmed. I get that. I totally get that. But you don't then make it simpler for these people by making it unlike any other game on the market. The wheel-based combat system, amazingly unique. I've never seen anything like it before. Somebody's probably already done it. Please tell me what it is in the comments. But to try and appeal to the masses, it's way too complicated. Way too complicated. I mean, you could argue that maybe it's a little bit simpler than a really deep RPG turn-based combat system, but Paper Mario has never been miles deep. I mean, it's a bit deep, but it's not like a more complex one that I can't think of. The general idea of Mario being in the center and having a load of enemies and moving them around to try and attack as many as possible, I think, whilst that still doesn't solve the complexity issue, I do think it's generally not a terrible idea. But I do think that the execution was a little bit less than perfect, and I think it primarily comes down to the fact that these are presented as puzzles, and the game even gives you a bonus for solving the puzzle when it comes to the end of the fight. It gives you more coins, so it is out and out designed to be, hey, there is one solution here. I mean, sometimes there are two, but there is one solution here, find it. And that is way too narrow. way too narrow. I mean, you don't have to solve it, you can just move the characters around and everything like that and just do the best you can, and oh, you know, you won't get any bonuses, but it's fine, you can still win, you can use healing items and stuff like that. But the entire system is focused around the idea of you absolutely doing that. It says you want to try and solve it, and when you do it, it's like, hey, great, and you get an attack bonus. No! No! Don't give me a bonus for actually solving the solution when there's one solution. Just let me attack normally. If it was just a little bit more straightforward, like there's a load of enemies around and you've got a certain number of ring moves and you move them around and you try and attack as many as you possibly can, but there is no one grand solution, then I can see that working. They would have to tweak other things like the amount of damage that enemies do to you and stuff like that. But then the enemies might actually have a chance to attack you, you know? And if you were lucky enough or clever enough that you were able to line up enemies perfectly and you could take them all out without being hit, that would be amazingly satisfying. It'd be like, oh yes, I managed to do that. Yeah, I managed to twiddle around. But when the game actively is telling you, you need to do this in order to progress and in order for the battle system to work, it just doesn't work. There's no room for flexibility, there's no room for tactics. It is basically do A, then B, then C, and the result is success. Rather than, oh, maybe I'll try this, and maybe I'll try this, and maybe I'll try that. And yes, you could argue that what I'm suggesting is a more complex system. But only by a tiny margin. The system is already stupidly complicated for what it is. You've got like the assist mode, which brings the red rings up and stuff like that and tells you where they need to go, which does make things a little bit simpler for, you know, sort of more casual players. But if anything, that just compounds the point of just how poorly planned out this system is from an accessibility point of view. I mean, for goodness sake, look at Pokemon. Pokemon has, you know, when you actually take a step back, really quite a complex battle system. You know, you've got status effects, you've got Pokemon at different levels, you've got type advantages, you've got God knows how many moves, you've got abilities to take into consideration, and how many different Pokemon and infinite different varieties. And yet it's still hugely, hugely popular with the casual market. And it offers you options. You can just go in all guns blazing and just beat the crap out of every Beedrill you come across. You can do that, or you can be a little bit more methodical and, oh, I haven't really got the type advantage to take this enemy out, so I'll use Sleep, and then I'll use Dream Eater with my Gengar or something, you know, anything like that. There is room for tactics. With Paper Mario, the Origami King, there is no room for tactics. It is, do this, use the most powerful attack you've got, bleh. And yet it still ends up being more confusing than bloody Pokemon. And I'd be able to forgive all of this, all the confusion, if it was at least interesting. But it's not. It's not, because there is no room for tactics. There is one solution. It's just not interesting. It's fine, but it's not interesting. In contrast, the boss battle system, I actually really like that, even if I did have a very senior moment where I just could not get my head around taking out the Earth Volumental? I just came up to the rings and it was just not clicking in my head, but then I worked it out. I suddenly realized what a div I was being, and that was hugely satisfying to actually have an issue and overcome it. And there is no one solution for taking out the bosses. It's great fun. Admittedly, I do think that having that system for all the fights would be needlessly time-consuming and complicated, but I'm just giving it credit where it's due. I really like that system. That's good. Still not accessible, far from it. It's still really pretty damn complicated, but I like it. It's good fun. The Origami King does so many things right for me. I absolutely adore the set pieces, the characters, apart from the fact that you can't really use partners properly, and, you know, the dialogue and finding the toads. I love that to death. But the weird, twisty, roundy thing, it just doesn't do it for me, and I don't think it's good for new players. I genuinely don't. And I think that maybe they should have just gone for a more traditional system, because even if a traditional system is arguably marginally more complicated, at least chances are players would have already played a very similar system and can apply that knowledge over. There's nothing like the combat system in the Origami King, and that's not a good thing. But what do you think of the combat system? I'm genuinely interested because it's so bizarre and it's such a weird part of the game that I really want to know what you think, so let me know your thoughts down there in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you twist that subscribe button round, left, right, up, down, slide, left, right, back, forward, center, and then just be able to leave the battle for no incentive. I forgot to mention that. There's no incentive! And be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye.